I am Louise Watson, Practice Director at Propeller Group and Board Member of the Women in Programmatic. I'm just going to pass over to my panellists for a very quick introduction into you and your job titles.
Hi, I'm Michal Nissenson. I'm Director of Partnerships at GeoEdge, and I'm also Director of Network Development at the Women in Programmatic Network. Nice to meet you.
Hi guys, my name's Amy. I'm Head of Advertising over at Wunderkind, who have excitingly just launched in the UK. We've only been going for the last 5 months or so. Wunderkind is very much well established globally, but yeah, just excitingly starting in the UK.
My name is Helen Mussard, and I am the CMO of IB Europe. It's with the European Trade Association for Digital Marketing and Advertising Industry.
Hello everyone, my name is Dunkerley. I'm Director of Data Trust at PwC. Got a long-standing history of working in digital advertising and programmatic, and effectively supporting our TMT clients with privacy, governance and ethics.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. So on this panel, we will be discussing the importance of ethical considerations in advertising, how it impacts individuals, communities and society as a whole. So over our first question, what are the main ethical dilemmas that the ad tech industry is facing at the moment? Start with you, Catherine.
So programmatic advertising has had a bit of a history of using, being reliant on algorithms and black box techniques. But I think there's the key challenges I think now will be the organisations and the tech companies who are still not very transparent about what they're doing with individuals' data. Obviously you've got the privacy regulations and laws, and which is the kind of the base level expectation, but there are still organisations who are stretching what they can do with individuals' data. So things like nudge techniques, dark patterns, inappropriate targeting, so possibly gaining consent but then maybe not being very transparent about who they're sharing their data with, and not doing due diligence on the partners that they're working with. So that's going above and beyond what your legal expectation is. There are some brands who are really getting it right and have the will to do the right thing with data. But yeah, I'd say that those are the still challenges now.
And then Michal, from a GeoEdge perspective, what are you seeing at the moment as kind of those main ethical dilemmas?
So in the intro I kind of forgot or neglected to mention what we do. So we make sure that the ads are clean and validate that there's no danger to the users. So whether it's malware or other threats like scams and so on, we make sure that these don't go through and not presented to the user. So we protect the user, which is the biggest asset. And the biggest problem I think with ethics is that who takes responsibility to protect the users, and kind of like a web of connections. So who's responsible for what? Because we all want a cleaner ad stack and we want to have ethical way of serving the ads, but who takes the responsibility, I think, is the dilemma.
And then Amy, did you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think there's a huge conversation around malware, what's safe for the user, data sharing, etc. But also at the heart of ethics, it's how we're showing the ads to the user in the first place, and what is actually being deemed as a sort of a good user experience now. And there's so much stuff that you can actually unpack within the ethics topic, whether that's across publisher content, whether that's across social. But I also feel like at the moment there's increasingly this race to the bottom, because brands have a huge focus, and it's coming from their agencies in terms of what's their viewability looking like, what's the time in view, what's the click-through rate, etc. So quite rightly so, and advertisers are wanting good ROI for their investment, but we need to kind of keep that in mind with the user experience as well, and that needs to be at the heart of everything.
Yeah. So I think publishers specifically are in a really difficult position in terms of revenue generation at the moment, hence the rise of paywalls. So how can the ad tech industry balance the pursuit of profit with the responsibility to prioritise ethics and social good? And how do we avoid having a two-tiered news information system that's completely dependent on who can pay?
It goes back to what we were talking about with the publishers have to be responsible, and they've got to be transparent to the to the users who are visiting their sites, making sure that the ads aren't cluttered. It's a very positive experience. If they don't get it right, the consumers won't go there. And your comments about this two-tiered internet system, that's something at IB Europe that we're really concerned about, because you can see at the moment that if you are the likes of the Times, the Financial Times, you will get people who will subscribe. That's wonderful. That payment back to them. But other news publishers are absolutely dependent on advertising to fund quality journalism. So unless we, with the ethics around consumer trust, supply across, trust and transparency across the supply chain, unless we figure that out, it really will impact publishers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so Catherine, what's your thoughts around that?
Having been media side historically, selling advertising programmatic to agencies, I understand there needs to be a shift.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be a way of publishers being paid for the quality content that they are generating, and I think those sort of premium or paywalls or those kind of solutions, are the way forward. However, we've got to be careful we're not collecting too much data, using that as an opportunity to data mine.
But you're advocating for a subscription-based internet.
I say with some media, with some content, then you should be expected to pay for it, and whether that's via advertising or with data or subscription. But I think you need to be transparent about what that transaction, that value exchange is.
Yeah.
And so I work with quite a few media owners who are reimagining what that way they communicate that nowadays. Did a huge big piece of research about a year or so ago where we looked at 20 PDPs, premium digital publishers, across from everything from Spotify to public sector broadcasting, and to have a look and see what they're doing, how are they collecting the data, what is that kind of mechanism that they're using. Be pleased to know that the move is definitely towards consent.
Yes, good.
But also really try to understand, well, what does the user want here? What's this value exchange? How can we communicate this to them better? So I think it's important that publishers are enumerated appropriately for the.
I think it's also interesting as well about when you're talking there about sort of like paywalls and actually paying for content. The younger generation has never been used to paying for a newspaper or magazines, and to then ask them to subscribe to the Times or any other of these super premium publishers with fantastic content, it's probably just not going to happen. Then their alternative naturally is social, which then becomes more of a problematic question around, is it vetted content, is it sort of clickbait, all of this kind of stuff. So it's a really tricky question. I don't think anyone's got it right in the industry at the moment.
If you look at CTV, this is, I think that's exciting, because there now we're moving into this fast, the ad-supported choice for consumers. So like with Netflix, you either pay for your subscription or you take the adverts. So you kind of want that to be in play as well for the publishers.
Well, that's why I refer to it as the value exchange, because it's not always necessarily handing over bucks for a monthly subscription. It's about, okay, well, if I share this a little bit more of a demographic data with you, or if I'm prepared to give you some insights about other areas of interest, then that can unlock the content. There's a couple of television broadcasters that are doing it really well. So there's one in particular who's got a bronze, silver and gold approach. It's quite transparent. You can access this content if you share this amount of data with us, and or you can go ad free, as you say. So I think it's about offering different mechanisms, different entry levels, dependent on what, and then that way it hopefully should be more democratic in how we share the news.
I think that the cliche in this case is right, because it's really the product. And I think in CTV it's super fascinating, because it's to extent you can actually today in the US subscribe to get a free telly and have ads run on it. So I think what kind of shifted is the fact that there's greater transparency in bringing that fact into the equation, that if it's free, you are the product, you're expected to give something in return. think there's more awareness there.
Yes.
But it's just not, you've got to be transparent about what that is, you know, rather than signing people up, signing their lives away, and then they don't realise what they're giving in return.
But just bringing it back to publisher content as well, we ran an interesting study at the start of the year looking into consumer sentiment around publisher pages and what they liked and what they didn't like. And one of the most astounding stats that we found, and it's a little bit uncomfortable for publishers that are listening now, but I think it was something around 85% of the respondents say that they're not happy with the ads environment across publisher pages at the moment. So I think there needs to be a lot of work done, but then where do publishers go from here? Because they're used to this revenue coming in, and they're used to being able to have banners here and placements there and standard MPU placements, etc. So you can't take that away overnight.
No.
But at the same time, there needs to be a solution for it. So what we also found within this study is that respondents don't want to also pay for content as such. They want, you know, an ad-funded model. An ad-funded model there. But maybe just this many ads is probably not the right way.
But so if we take this from an ethical perspective, and we've touched on some of these kind of strategies now, and we've been talking about how you can take things from CTV and you can take things from different areas. So what innovative strategies can be implemented in ad tech to ensure that we have transparency and accountability? So we've touched quite a lot on the publisher side of things, but it's kind of broken into three areas. So we're looking at how do we protect the publisher, how do we protect the user, and then how do we protect the advertiser as well? And obviously they're all very important parts. So Amy, did you just want to kick off with that one?
Yeah, so I think attention is a big word if no one has heard about this in the industry over the last couple of years. And I think they all pull in different directions in terms of how that plays into ethics. So the advertiser wants to drive high attention to the user. The user wants attention but in the right way, but not also multitasking, reading a content, but also having to look at an ad at the same time. And a publisher also wants to have good metrics to be able to sell to advertisers as well. And I think it's about actually doing a lot of research and development into the timing in which ads are delivered to the user. And a lot of it comes around to, timing and how that is nuanced.
Michal, what was your thoughts on that one?
I think, again, people are willing to accept any kind of intrusion, but it has to be done in the right way. And I think, taking from what Amy said about the research, we've done a research in Japan a few years ago, and it linked the responsibility between having a bad ad experience to the publisher. So we asked users, let's say you're being thrown out of a page into a scam page and are asked to just give your details to win this free new iPhone. Who's to blame for that? And they say the publisher that ran the ad. So I think in a way it's a bit unfair because there's an entire ecosystem, but the users hold the publisher accountable almost the entire time. But the publishers needs to be the smart, in this panel, not the guy, but the girl or the woman in the room, and to make sure they have the tools and the knowledge they need to not allow that, to put boundaries to ads and to make sure they're served in an ethical way, kind of like what Wunderkind does, in a way that doesn't create a negative feedback for the user, or use tools like GeoEdge that filter out bad content, or other in-house solutions that help them. But they have to be aware of the fact that they're expected to give some sort of respect to the user.
That makes sense. And Catherine, so what are you seeing from your side of things on this?
Strategies for the brands and the publishers as to how...
Publishers and individuals.
Okay. So from the brand's perspective, we're seeing a trimming of media owners that they'll be working with, vetting the quality of the data and the content coming from those publishers to reduce the risk on themselves, but also for the right placement for brand safety and so on. So they are creating trusted publisher networks where they will vet the media that they're working with. From the publisher's perspective, they're applying much more due diligence over the tracking technologies that they are deploying on their own sites, so whether that's what they're currently using when an individual hits a page, but also clearing out the legacy tracking and making sure that they're having a closer eye on what advertisers might be dropping on their sites, so that they can be transparent with their audience as to who's collecting, what they're collecting, and what the purpose is. From an individual's perspective, I think the awareness is much stronger than it used to be. So individuals are voting with their feet, and they're opting for brands. You talked about it earlier, brands that they trust. And it's 3% investment in brand trust is 1% increase in brand value, and so it's brands are really starting to wake up to this fact. The CMO certainly. So yeah, I think it's harder. It's harder, to go with premium publishers, to do the due diligence, to have more eyes on your supply chain. But the reputational damage that if you're not doing that is significant. So it's that's the three different perspectives.
I think the word is trust, because when there's transparency and there's trust, it's easy from everyone's perspective. It's easier, even when little mishaps happen. But when there's not a strong infrastructure of both the transparency and the trust, then it's much more likely to have problems.
And you only get that by having a policy and a process that you actually hold your teams accountable to.
Exactly, accountability.
And those are the fundamental principles, I guess, of ethics: transparency, respect, fairness, and fairness to the user. I think you have to. It's good to talk a good game. I think essentially, we know a lot of brands like to talk a good game, but doing actually what you're saying, what it says on the tin, I think the say is, but actually following through and having that robust process and is what's going to actually improve the ecosystem.
So Helen, over to you for the next question. So what steps do you think can be taken to ensure ethical decision making is embedded within the industry as a whole? I know you see quite obviously broad with lots of companies in the IAB. What are you seeing at the moment?
Every year we create the Supply Chain Transparency Guide. And that is a really good starting point, because what we do with that is we have all of the different stakeholder groups, so the agencies, the publishers, and we give them a series of questions to ask their partners. So that will be everything from data there. So for a publisher to their SSPs, there's a series of questions, and then vice versa. But what we're seeing is at the moment the shift towards now sustainability. This is coming back absolutely huge, especially when we look at a kind of regulatory individual member state basis. And then actually now, which I think is really great, is that we didn't actually talk about in the last question, we didn't talk about the content of the ads. It's really important that not only is the messages that the consumer's seeing is ethical, like greenwashing, so sustainability, there's being already checks being done by the advertising authority across Europe to really tell these brands off if they're going to put misleading things out there about the sustainability quotas. I think it's just empowering and educating all stakeholders on these are the questions you should be asking about data management, sustainability, transparency.
Procurement, I guess, is another thing. You have your due diligence you do when you're at procurement stage. It's building in those kind of questions to make sure that you're holding hands with the right brands. Do they have the same brand values as you? Are they prepared to data, are they data mining, or what was the quality of the sources of their data?
You see when it goes wrong, like the very popular, I don't know if it's very popular now, but the alcoholic drink in the US, beginning with B, when they had that absolute crazy, they did their campaign and it slightly went wrong for them. I'm sure most people are familiar with this, but rather than for standing by and being true with their decisions and standing up for their ambassador, they didn't. They walked away, and I think that is again a part with ethics that you have to you stick with your guns.
I think it is getting increasingly a focus though from the user, because they are choosing ethically now, whereas I don't maybe think that was as much of an issue 20 years ago. So I think users are becoming a lot more wiser to it. But just coming back to your point around sustainability and greenwashing, I think there is a huge need for third-party companies to vet this, so that companies aren't just, ad tech vendors, brands, anyone else. They need to be consulting and talking to third parties to actually vet this, to make sure that they're not marking their own homework.
I also think that today there are content problems in ads that no one even thought would even exist 20 years ago. Who would have thought that political ads would be banned from most of the US publishers we are working with? One of our clients, NPR, said shut it all down if you need to, because the political ads became so controversial in a way that has never happened in the past. There was a self-moderation that is currently not necessarily in place. And so it is required for the industry itself to moderate and regulate these ads, so that, if you report about the news, you cannot advertise the news. It's a bit of an ethic catch-22. You need the fund to be able to speak and have fair journalism, but once you put these in, there's no more fair journalism, so it's a problem.
And increased use of algorithms, models, machine learning for operational efficiencies, for creating content now and imagery, is even more potential for bias, exploitative behaviour, manipulative behaviour through political messaging. So, but the transparency will, at the very least, shine a light on that, and then it gives the users or individuals more choice of who they work with, what they read, etc.
Absolutely. So, obviously we've gone through quite a lot today, covering different areas of ethics within the industry, but what's the one thing that you'd like people to take away from our conversation today? Michal, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to go back to basics. There's the rule of ethics in business. If you can talk about what you're doing at the dinner table and be comfortable with what you're doing and how you're doing it, you're doing the right thing. And if you're not, then rethink your practices. Act differently, and I think it starts with us. If we take the accountability and the measurements to do within our scope what we can do, so that no ethical problems go through the system, I think we're all better off.
And then Amy, over to you.
I think avoiding this race to the bottom. I think publishers realising how much power they have and the quality of their journalism, and demanding more from their ad tech partners. It all comes down to wanting to protect the user, whether that be data, whether that be user experience. So, I think the publishers often feel like they're the middleman in this, whereas without them, we haven't got an industry.
So actually, I was just thinking of the ISPA study that you guys did. And actually, I think there is a lot of accountability for our industry, probably more so than some industries out there. And as soon as you get big studies that are produced like that, okay, we don't want to always be reactive, but I think that's been the change now. Rather than us reacting when we see these shocking stats, there are strong guidelines, there are practices in place. Overall, it's a very good industry with great transparency, accountability, quality metrics in place, brand safety, we've got all of those foundations, and we, with the ethical side, I think that's just something that we have to make sure that it's new things like sustainability is just factored in.
I'd say, as we're talking about the women in programmatic, I'm here in this lovely part of the world enjoying the sunshine. Advertising is essentially the revenue generating body which helps fund events like this, but a message would say to anybody working data science or data driven advertising, programmatic, that just because you can do something with data doesn't mean you should. So maybe start to apply that lens to any new initiatives which might invest in disruptive or emerging technologies.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for all of you joining me today. Thank you for coming up to join us. If you want to help yourself to drinks, cool down. But it's been brilliant to see you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you for a very interesting conversation.